recording in progress. All right. So thank you for joining us, Tom. We talked on the phone last week, and then Joe Staub connected us a while back, right? And that was back when you were still at Yale. So, you and I know each other. I'm familiar with you and, places you've been. Why don't you go ahead and fill in everybody else, our members and listeners to, who you are and where you've been and kind of your journey.
Yeah, sure. Well, first off, thanks for having me on. My journey, like many coaches, is not a straight one. So we go through all different phases of our career, and for me, it really started out at Division 3 with my internship. So, and that was over at Salve Regina. So, out of college, got a really great experience there. Worked with Tom Blaney, and really got to train a lot of different teams. And I think that's kind of where everybody has their iron bug story, where they get bit and they really get excited about it. Went through all the stages of, oh, I think I got this, to, oh my God, I don't got this.
Yeah, everybody goes through that one where it's like,
Yeah, and
I
I'm
just
still
finished
stuck.
my first internship and I know
Yeah.
everything.
Right. And I'm still there. And I think actually the more that I've been exposed to and the more that I've seen, we're just scratching the surface on, the science, technology, and kind of those applications. But again, was exposed to some really good historical training methods and things like that. From there, went private sector, so got to do personal training. So see if people actually want to pay for your knowledge. So that was cool, being able to do that in downtown, and then was blessed enough to be invited to come back to be a full-time staff member at Salve, and was able to do that for 3 years. So that was great. After that, we decided that I wanted to try to give it a go in private sector and started a company, so an analytics company, in fact. So that was Athletic Standard. So building products to be able to figure out optimization of training. So we did that, and that was a cool experience. Did that for 5 years, and while doing that, really learned a lot, both from a leadership standpoint, from a performance standpoint. And one of our clients, who was Yale, when that had ended, really approached me after that time to say, would you like to come to the college sector, Division 1? And I said, oh, well, let me think about it. And then they were pretty good at convincing me. And so speaking with the head lacrosse coach at the time and then the head football coach, it was very clear, when they approached me, they said, to be honest, we'll make it as simple as we can. We want to beat Harvard. We want to win a national championship. That's it. They're very clear. And we want you to use kind of some of the things that you've done to help us do that, because football hadn't beat Harvard in 10 years, hadn't won an Ivy in 11, which is their highest level that they can achieve. They don't compete on the national circuit. And then the lacrosse team was pretty good, definitely top percent of the league, but the goal was to win an outright. So we applied a lot of technology, we applied a lot of analytics, and within the first year, we beat Harvard. Within the first 18 months, we beat Harvard again and won the outright title for the first time since, I think, the 80s. And everyone said you got lucky. We made the defensive player of the year. We had the rookie of the year. So a lot of our profiling and stuff that we got from Boyd Epley and Bill Kramer, that worked. So after that very lucky season in 17, we then got lucky again in winning the national title with lacrosse, beating Duke at Gillette Stadium for the national championship. And then we got lucky again that we also had the Heisman of lacrosse, which is the Tewaaraton, and Ben Reeves. So prior to that, they had never had anybody even kind of elected to that finalist panel, but we won that. So I was very, very lucky in those first couple of years. And then from 2018, really kind of continuing to build the staff and an internship to kind of be at the tip of the spear. And so we would go on to win again in 2019 for football, have the offensive player of the year. And then just recently I found out, I guess, one of our former players, who was the first one to be drafted in a while, also led the NFL in tackles. I think he had 192 tackles and just signed a pretty nice deal with the Jacksonville Jaguars and Foye Oluokun. So again, from a player development standpoint, if I had told you in 2016 we were going to make a leading NFL tackler, people would think you're crazy. But again, we followed the data for quite a while. And then obviously when COVID hit, there was no Ivy Sports, so there was a chance to develop. It was kind of a redshirt freshman year. So we did that. And then actually in the spring of in 21, I was approached by Hawken Dynamics to take a lot of these concepts that we had been working on since 16 to go public and to be able to integrate that into a professional platform and an educational setup to be able to work with customers. And so that's where I'm at now. So working on front end design, work with a great team, but then also helping customers kind of apply data and science in a meaningful and purposeful way. So that's kind of my long-winded story of how we got here.
Yeah, what are some of the things that you guys have done, and we're doing? Because I specifically remember having that conversation with you, and it was like, hey, we had an algorithm that knew, like, if so and so was sick and had to miss training, we knew exactly how to adjust their training for the rest of the week so that way they'd be caught up. I'm probably completely bastardizing exactly what it was, but fill me in on what actually happened, and then for the members, like, what were you guys doing with that stuff?
Yeah, so the programming, when you talk about writing programs, I think everyone knows reps and sets.
Yeah.
Not everybody understands that just on reps, sets, and intensities, there's something like 10 to the 65th power combinations. So there's a lot of things you can do. And when we talk about reps and sets and exercises, it's almost like medicine. And so at UConn in the early 2000s, you talk about it was a time of Camelot where you had, some of the titans of our industry came out of that time frame because they were students. You mentioned Staub. I know Eric Cressy came through there and a whole bunch of other people, Duncan French at the UFC now. It was a weird time where you were able to have research combined with practicality under Jerry Martin. And so they started this idea of what was called flexible nonlinear. And so you have a larger goal for your cycle. So say 6 weeks or 12 weeks. And it's milestone based. It's not a hard 6 weeks or a hard 8 weeks. We're going to try to develop some characteristic for this period of time. But every day we're going to check and use some of the science markers that we know to optimize the training. So, like you said, someone's sick. If I need to move 5,000 pounds today, how do I make that up? And just like medicine, you can't just double and triple doses. And so there's some pretty good research that we use to basically make parameters and rules to then optimize the plans that we wrote and then compare them back to, pre and post testing. And so that's where a lot of the software that we developed was very helpful. So Tofi Zimnicki, who was an intern, became full-time staff member, built the auditor. So when I ask both of you, can you write programs? You'll say, yeah, I can. Well, how good is it? Is it 30% increase in strength in 4 weeks? Is it 6% increase in tonnage? What makes it good? And so we see this in the INOL, we see this in the Prilipin charts, which were old kind of weightlifting historical records to try to gauge load and gauge intensity. And so we were able to take workouts year over year when they were used and optimize them. So we knew that we could push a little bit harder, we could back off a little bit. So if we were focusing on strength, okay, what do I need to do? What tool do I have? How does this tool, weigh against other workouts? And then what about my single leg work? What about my muscle work? What about my velocity based stuff? And so there's a sequencing that is in everybody's training log that you can look at, and you can figure out what works and what doesn't. Some people need a lot of variety. Some people need consistency. Think about the 5x5 program. So some of the small off stuff that works really, really well. Other people like tons of variety. Charles Poliquin talked about rotating every 3 exposures, change the angles to protect the ligaments and tendons. Well, that works for some people. Other people need just that kind of consistent loading, and it's a moving target. And so building software that could visualize that gave us a huge advantage. And so that's what we used when we were working with lacrosse, when we were working with football, to kind of bring everybody along the way. So flexible nonlinear is what it's called. And it started at UConn, and then we tried to build on that at Yale every year.
How were you able to do that with a team that had a high roster size, but your staff is not very big? Like, how are you able to get that in the weeds with the flexible nonlinear, but you might not have the same number of people that you did, when you're at UConn?
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point, and that's where technology became super powerful. I didn't have time to be able to go through and manually check every log. I didn't have time to manually write out each workout. We would write it, we would load it into TeamBuildr, we'd see what the output was, and it would automatically go back and reweight it so that way when we stepped to the rack, one person could administer, I think at one point football had something like 28 different programs running concurrently across the 120-man roster. But if you didn't have technology, it would be very challenging. So we had technology, UConn had more hands. And so that's where Tofi's brilliance and the rest of the staff, and again, I wouldn't just say just him, but, down the line of everybody that was on that staff was committed to scaling. And that's what gave us that incredible power to then make basically a medicine cabinet of workouts that we could tap into and then grow. Because I think a lot of times you write workouts, the next coach who comes in writes his own workouts. And so we really don't gain institutional knowledge. But we know from year over year, we have every rep from 2017 at Yale stored, saved, cataloged, and indexed against exposure. So we know what the anticipated outcome is. Imagine if you took Tylenol and you didn't know what the milligrams were. Like you could take one pill and it would be not enough. You could take two pills and it's way too much. And so learning how to dose volume, intensity, angle exposure, velocity, and all the other things that we know can really impact growth. And so that's what we really, really specialized in over the years through the technology.
And that is, sorry, just to jump in, that is with a combination of, say, technology items or several data points, or how did you pick which ones to use? Is it just via the force plate? Let us know.
Yeah, so we started with TeamBuildr. So we would write out our workouts. They would go in there. And so you have basically your workout logs. And we grew up through that and are very comfortable in that environment. And then we would use sensors. So I remember getting made fun of back in 2015, 2016 for velocity-based training. If you squat double your body weight, squatting is good, getting stronger is good. But at some point, there's other benefits we can have. And so moving heavier weight fast, trying to get our 60% of 1 RM at a meter per second, if we couldn't do that, we would use that sensor. That data would be fed in, and then we wrote stuff in Google Sheets. We wrote stuff in different databases, and really optimized it over the years. And then when we added the force plates, we were able to take it to another level where not only were we able to see outputs, we could have weighted strategies. So if you jump 30 inches, this is good. If you jump 32, this is also good. But when you come down, if those 2 extra inches, when you come down, results in a strategy or a shift or a mechanic that isn't favorable to longevity, we now have this kind of Pareto effect, right? So a dump truck has 400 horsepower, a Lamborghini has 400 horsepower, completely different transmissions. And so what's fascinating to me now, and as we dig deeper into the data, there really is this longevity versus high performance curve. Because again, you change your Pirelli tires in one race multiple times, but yet your regular everyday car tires, you could run them for 4 to 6 months. So depending on the level of performance, you really have to think about your strategy that you're using. And the plates are kind of, an intense way to be able to really get that on the ground at the rack level knowledge of what's going on, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I might bring in a bit of controversy here. I've heard similar messages before, and I had the experience at Sparta Performance Science, having a force play and then having an algorithm that says, hey, you move this way, you need more of this, more of that. Maybe you're on the same, like you said before, like maybe you're on the same program for a while, or like small tweaks where other people just need variations. And what really resonates is the fact that you talked about exercise being medicine to the body. It's like, this is what you need. So it's not just about what's going to happen on the bar, is what's going to get you quicker, fresher, stronger, or whichever goal it is. Are you familiar with this idea, or with Sparta? Do you work in a similar way? Or sounds a bit better, actually.
So I think every time we look at technology, there's a legacy that you have to pay respect to. So when you say Sparta, and I don't care whether it's that or it's AMTI AccuPower, if it's anybody, it's an attempt to understand movement, and it's an attempt to get greater fidelity. And we saw this in, say, on the bar, right? A max out, right? Your max should go up, max up, good. But then we learned about velocity, and then we learned about joules, and then we learned about work. So I'm never going to poo-poo anyone for an attempt at adding fidelity. But what I can say is that you have to be very careful in any aspect of coaching if you become myopic. So if it's 3 metrics, if it's 2 metrics, if it relate to the person, what's their age? And so when we talk about context, that's on a step function. I think right now, as we go forward in technology in our field, we all need to kind of heed some caution of, you can sit there and analyze things 6 ways to Sunday, but without context, you're just wasting time. And people that I've spoken to will say that all the time. They're like, man, I got all this number, I got all this data. What does it mean? Well, if your person jumps 15 inches, it doesn't matter what your loading strategy is. It doesn't matter what your program is if everybody else jumps 35 or 40. And again, I throw out a number, just I'll say a vertical jump height. It could be a velocity on a GPS. So there's relevance and context. As a strength coach, you can take certain characteristics and enhance them with gain potential to a certain degree. But I can't make you taller. I can make you a little bit faster, but largely your top end velocity is going to be, what came through your genetics. And we can make it better, but you can't take someone who runs a 7 flat 40 and make them run a 4.4. And so understanding what characteristics you can improve, short term and long term, and then at what cost. If an individual needs to be 300 pounds to play offensive line, but they have a 9 centimeter knee, you know that they're not going to be able to hold that for the same longevity as, say, someone with a 13.5 centimeter knee. And so because I can doesn't mean I should. And so that's kind of my response to any technology. I'm always open to hear, but I want to know what's the context and how you're using it. And then do you integrate it or do you suffocate it? Because technology should be an enhancement, not something that creates data lock where nobody can agree. And it's just this kind of frantic, this number says this, but this number says that. And again, research versus the real world where people have to win to, pay their mortgage. They're starting to collide right now. And so you have to work as a team to be able to make a best fit situation for what you're going to do.
How'd you get that to happen though? Like, how did you guys not have exactly what you say not happen? How did you make sure that didn't happen? And then what was your starting point for the base program with there to be 28 variations of it? What was your starting off point? And then how did you dial off of, what was the main river? What were all the diversions? And then were there diversions off of that? Or was it, truly a 27 off of that main one?
Yeah, I mean, great question. I think people don't realize after every season, before we start anything, as a staff, we would sit down and we would say, what are the dynamics of our sport? And I say that because most coaches will sit down and say, well, let's look at the bench press, the deadlift, pick your list of exercises. The first thing we would do is go to the coaches. So say it's football, say it's lacrosse.
Yeah,
What
that
do
was
you
going to be my
see?
question. Did you ask, like, were you asking it every year? Because again, the dynamics of football and lacrosse don't change in terms of angles and running in the different, vectors. But were you asking that every year because there was constant turnover or there was a different strategy being played on the field?
Jumping on that, I was going to ask about profiling when we were talking about the metrics and the knee and how far is someone going to go from where they start. So it sounded like you start even like further back with the profiling and the ideas and the context that you were bringing up before.
Yeah, I mean, so again, on both of those, every year you meet with the sport coach, and a lot of time we would spend as a staff trying to decipher someone and what they saw as a coach, especially older coaches, maybe that are anti-technology, but they've seen 50 years, 40 years of a sport, and just let them talk. And you mentioned lacrosse didn't change a bunch. Well, but they did add a shot clock in 2018. So the bicarbonate buffering system was a lot different demand than what it had been in years prior where you could stall it out. The midfield position, if an individual could get up and down with the same amount of skill, not having to send him off, gave us an advantage every time up the field. So suddenly that was a unique wrinkle. And again, I've never played lacrosse. I can barely catch and shoot. But I would listen to our coaches and they would say these things. And I was like, that's interesting. Now, they don't know about lactate levels. They don't know about carnosine. They don't know about carbohydrate and glycolysis or an HbA1cs and all these other things. But if you're telling me that that's a critical component, I'm going to spend some time thinking about it. And then I'm going to take everybody that you said is good and I'm going to look back at their data. And I think a lot of people mess that up. Right now, they'll take their best performers in the weight room. We've all heard this. Well, just because they're good in the weight room doesn't mean they're good on the field. Correct. My goal was to say who's good on the field, what minimum standards did they have, and let's try to make sure that everybody on the team can at least meet those minimum standards. And so it's a risk management situation
Did you do
rather
that
than
for different positions? Sorry to interrupt you. Did you do that across all your different positions?
Yep.
For, midfield, attack, defense, and then within football, how are you breaking those up? Because we have a large population of American football listeners.
Yeah, just every single position. So what makes a tight end different than a tackle? In fact, what if you're a tight end in high school, but you're just a little bit slow at college? You might actually be 40 pounds away from being an awesome left tackle because you're 6'6" with a 6'10" wingspan. Are you actually a better fit into some of these other areas? But it's just super important to understand, you have to start with the performance on the field and work your way back. And I know you had also asked too about, we start with the profiling. Profiling really goes into a very deep realm, and it's not just the weight room. I can tell you right now on a reaction board or on a Dynavision, or we created, if anybody looks up the light board we built, offensive players have certain hand speeds to hit the whack-a-mole dot. The defensive guys are just a shade off, a little bit slower, but they can get a high accuracy. An offensive player will smash every light. And so I said that to one of our coaches, and he goes, well, no, duh, of course. Offensive players are tractors. Defensive players have to be reactors. And so even just that little insight of saying, wow, here's an individual, he's in a position, he may be athletically gifted. And we had a player that was the fourth outside linebacker, never played. We looked at the numbers, we looked at his data, and I said, hey, do you ever play offense? And he goes, yeah, I did in high school. Talked to the head coach, he flips him. Well, now he plays in the NFL. So, and that move didn't happen until his senior year.
So you're saying that you put people in the NFL. So just,
It's
hey,
moneyballing.
there's exactly, like, just hire my man right there.
Yeah.
I'm joking.
I think it's funny though, that at least I had a coach that was willing to listen. And I think he was willing to listen to the data because we had a lot of times interacting with each other where I was listening. And I think that's super important, is to take that time, let the sport coaches talk, so that when I come in and say like your braking force is changing or I'm seeing an asymmetry, it isn't just like the sky is falling all the time. You've gone back and forth in your conversations to build trust in your calls that you make, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
How did you incorporate any of the stuff on the field, to tie into that too? Because obviously you just said the sport is a sport, the sport is key. So how did you then take into account, okay, you got 20 programs in the weight room, you got 20 programs on the field. What does that look like?
Yeah.
I mean, because then you got speed work and conditioning too. So sorry, like and then your jump, like how deep down that rabbit hole are you going?
Yeah, I mean, again, great questions. And so for us, conditioning was really, again, looking at, how your body handles those repeated exposures and developing protocols where not only could you, measure high lactate, but you could also see brain function. And so if you look at Brandon Stone's work that he did looking at cognitive function on the NBAC test, what's interesting is in the high metabolic, high stress environments, people make mistakes. And so now working in law enforcement and military, you'll see some of these times where it's like, well, what did you see? Well, I thought I saw this. This happens. If you work with an athlete and they say, I don't know what I did, I don't know why I did that, they're not wrong. The frontal brain is going to shut off and try to survive, especially in those tough, high stress times. So we would run things. And if you see, again, you mentioned American football, mat drills or any of those kind of variation, high stress things, what they're trying to achieve is create kind of a stress inoculation to performance and standards and continue to have someone push through. Now, we figured out what's really interesting is if you line a person up and say run, they can run and hit a certain time on a laser or GPS. If I add an element of stress where I say on an even number, I want you to run to the 10, on an odd number, I want you to run to the 35 and back, do it as fast as you can, try it. They slow down because if they jump off sides or there's a false start and there's now consequence to their peers, they throttle down. And so when we would talk about our core values of finishing, going through a play, 100% effort without fear of consequence, that was super important because in any drill or exercise in the conditioning element, they will down regulate to not make a mistake. And the problem is in a sport of 1/10 of a second or a 1/4 inch here or there, that constant down regulation for fear of failure becomes really devastating. And so I wanted to make sure if we jumped off sides, we all jumped off sides. If we went with 100 miles an hour, full speed, even in our most tired times. And so that's what really the summer was about. But the prerequisite internal chemistry stuff was worked on all spring. It was worked on during April and May semester and early June to make sure that our toxicity numbers were as high as they needed to be before we even added the element of the cognitive training. And that was super helpful.
Did you also go down the rabbit hole of the, I guess you could say the modality in which you were getting them in that state? So linemen doing more specific to what they would do, less running, more pushing, pulling, grappling, skill guys doing things on their feet. How, again, deep down that rabbit hole would you get for the buffering and then letting them do their work? And again, how did you logistically make that work with large roster sizes and minimal staff, when you take out the technology of, a platform like TeamBuildr, which big heart out to them.
Yeah. Yeah, again, we knew certain numbers. So people would talk about tonnage. That's not a relevant number. If tonnage is locked and the protocol is repeated, and like I said, we've earmarked some of those intensities. So how you do your 4x10 or how you do your 6x10, how you move that in a given time period, or that work capacity at load, because anybody can move weight, but moving certain intensities at certain loads at certain angles was more favorable than not. There's a famous article that was written in 2014 out of UConn for the off-season training, looking at heavy loading. So we knew how many reps at a given angle we needed in order to get the ligaments and tendons to be more resilient. And again, I'm not going to say injury prevention, because anybody that says that, show me the data from the last 25 years in the NCAA. Injuries are there. They just change and morph. And so our goal was to make sure that joints weren't the point of failure. And so we knew we had to do the conditioning stuff earlier on. Then we would load it with intensities and vectors throughout summer one, and then we would apply it in the trenches. And if an individual couldn't hit, say 4 sets of 10 at 420 for weight, 425, 430, on a 2-minute clock, they would struggle. And we would see that in knockdowns and shocks on tape. And so we would work with the different coaches to be able to see that and say, hey, this is an area of improvement. And I cared less about people having super, super great qualities, but when we would profile, think about like an insurance policy, it's risk against failure. And failure states happen in the form of injuries, overtraining, or underperformance. So just because, people say, oh, do no harm. Okay, cool. Imagine being an emergency room doctor who's like, I'm not giving any medicine. Like, no, you do, as a strength coach, have to be able to look at your craft and say, I have the capacity to work on soft tissue, or to work on strength, or work on speed, to put together a group for conditioning, to work on certain speed and velocities we need to achieve. But you do have to do something, and you have to do it responsibly. And that's where, without technology, especially with what we know is possible today, it becomes very hard. It becomes very hard to be competitive if you're just trying to eyeball everything.
So talking about the technology and the company that you had, been able to put together when you first started it, talk a little bit about, what you were doing at Athletic Standard, which, like you said, as Yale was a customer, and then how the stuff you did with Athletic Standard has evolved into what you've done with Hawkins for the last, almost year and a month.
Yeah, I mean, what Athletic Standards showed me was that there is a way to optimize a roadmap. And we saw that with Bishop Gorman as a great example too. They were one of our customers. They won, I don't know if it was 2 or 3 back-to-back national titles, Coach Manny in that time. So you're talking like 2011, 2012 to win those national titles, to be able to have a conversation with someone. And I think what's super important, and both as a coach and in private sector, don't tell me how to do my job. If you can help me learn how to do my job faster, if you can make my decisions right more often than not, I'm going to listen. And so Athletic Standard really showed that there is a way to kind of optimize training, and the results spoke for themselves. Florida State won a women's soccer title. So multiple domains having success was a good eye opener. Now, on the Hawkins side of things, when we start thinking about what we know, what we can measure, I mean, that wasn't even a thing 10 years ago. So now, how can I optimize even more? And if anyone's not familiar with this, when we used to at Yale teach programming, and even still now, if anyone's familiar with the traveling salesman problem, are you guys familiar with that? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I think I've heard of it, but to say that I know it properly enough, no.
Yeah, it's a math problem that you'll see a lot, where basically there's 5 cities. And if I asked you right now, I need you to go to these 5 cities, and I told both of you to go do it, how would you approach that problem? And so would you go to the nearest? Would you go with the cheapest tolls? Would you try to figure out, time of year where certain cities might be, more difficult to get into? At 5 cities, the traveling salesman problem, it has so many combinations. There's different routes.
I was thinking, like, okay, how quickly do I need to go? What
Yep.
am I supposed to go?
What's the time limit? What's the objective?
It's like when Keir says, how long is it? How long is a string? You're like, well, obviously it's a right. Like,
what I remind people is that that's 5 cities. No doubt every athlete you work with has way more than 5 cities. So just strength, power, speed, nutrition. Think of all the domains or cities that we deal with. If we're going to say, getting to these 5 cities, we're going to reach their genetic potential, their genetic optimal level. As a coach now, when we think about making our decisions and choices, sequencing matters, timing matters, resources matter. And the other thing is that a city is stagnant. An individual may become more committed. They may be less committed. They may be graduating. They may have a life event. And so for a strength coach on a 120 person roster, that's a lot of moving parts. So what can I do to help organize? And so in kind of math and science terms, those sorting algorithms become very important. And that's what I'm excited about now is when we look in to be able to say, yes, I did this. This is what happened. An immediate pre and post dosage response is super fascinating.
So what exactly are you guys doing now at Hawkins with, the customers that you're serving in the capacity? Like what are people getting when they get to, get a conversation with you? Are you out there visiting them, or is it just, via Zoom, things of this nature?
So anybody that joins kind of the Hawken family, the goal is to ask them, what are you trying to do? And we have customers that are world leading researchers and they're like, we're good. And we just want the technology and the software and, we'll let you know if we need anything. Conversely, on the flip side, we have college programs where they might say, hey, can you do an in-service? We have professional customers that want us to meet and give continuing education. And what we're trying to shoot for is a brand and a culture kind of fostering communication and fostering education rather than saying, this is how you train. Because we've seen applications, specifically, I think about some of the stuff we've done with military or law enforcement. How does your body shock and absorb a different caliber? What drill are you actually physically fit enough to do to get the optimal response from? In the weight room, hang cleans, Olympic lifting, yeah, could be good, right? But for all of us, if we walk in and someone doesn't even know how to grab the bar, it doesn't mean that that's not good. It's not good now. But we can now actually measure, and again, trying to measure responses, understand the metadata around it, and help apply it. That's where working with customers to kind of be at the tip of the spear, not only for our training and interventions, but also kind of learn is super, super important. And also to something we take very seriously, making sure that the readings are accurate. I know you asked earlier about people have proprietary methods and this, that, like we measure stuff really accurately. And again, when people start talking about stuff being proprietary, I kind of laugh. That's fine. That's cool. Do you? But what we like is that if you need to measure this super, super accurately and you need to be able to put your job on the line, that this data is what it is, then cool, we can roll with that. And if you need help, if you don't know what a metric is, we'll talk to you. You can give us a call. We have a great relationship and those relationships grow. And sometimes people will work with us at one university or institution. I think you guys love to comment and chirp on kind of the industry sometimes, is that it's very transient right now. And so as we go forward, a customer today could be a customer for life, and they might be at 3 or 4 different institutions, right? So
whether they're going to take you wherever they go because of, whatever experience they have.
Yeah.
Which is what you see whenever they, move on and they have, their equipment people or whatever that is that they, install their new facility with.
And I think it's so exciting.
We had that with our Firefly the other week when he was an athlete and now they have this brand and this product and he just talks to his former coaches. And they just move jobs and, you start your network.
And that's why too, for me, it's exciting as you see someone. I was just at a school last week working with a bunch of graduate students on biomechanics, but they're going to go all over the world. And again, to see their kind of eyes light up. And one of the kids goes, can I measure this? Yeah, jump on, go. Well, what about that? Just go. And I think if you look at any other industry, whether it's medical, finance, cybersecurity, there is this element of exploration and sandbox environment where there's no constraints, just go and measure. But also on the flip side, when do I take action? So is my information for exploration or is my information for action? I think those are 2 different worlds. And so that's where really finding out, what do we know to be true? What do we know to be mostly true? And then what are we we'll take a look at it in 6 months. Breaking it up into buckets like that makes it a lot more usable than, oh my God, I've got all this data, I need to throw everything out the window. Because we'll tell everybody, common sense ultimately is your kind of final, deciding factor on what you're going to do. Because ultimately you need to own whatever training prescription or training intervention that you're using with an athlete. You need to own that. And we hope to help make those decisions a little bit easier and quicker.
Is
Anybody
that
that
is
no,
that informed decision making, right? So I don't want to go that far because it seems really precise, but that educated guess or educated hunch, because like you said, it all comes down to context. So decision making might have these non-sport, non-physiological related issues. It might be a calendar, it might be timing, it might be an unexpected social or personal event. So know as much as you can know.
Right. And even things that you hadn't thought about. So for instance, I'll share with everyone a little tip. Customer wanted to talk about recovery. Do we all agree that recovery is important? Yeah.
depends on what you're recovering from, right?
Correct.
Hey.
Hey, right?
Seriously.
Self-inflicted or game-inflicted or whatever. But okay, so recovery is important. What are the modalities? Both either manual therapy, say it's in the college setting, maybe you have to go get treatment. Well, how do you incentivize people to do that? Well, one of the things we said is, and this came up from Peter Mundy, who's on staff, talking about one of the things that they've used is that you can assign a point system. So if you foam roll, you get a point. If you go get scraped, it's 3 points. It's whatever. And you list out your modalities with kind of a point system. And for a team who's new, a team that is, kind of really their program's turning around and they're looking for a way to kind of gamify it, how many points can you get a week? And then, okay, we went from doing nothing to now we're changing habits and behaviors. But that's just that menu style kind of point system was something that people hadn't thought. And so that was something that we were able to help a customer with. And it gave context that that's what they needed. Now, other situations, when we deal with, say, a professional league, you can't mandate anything. So how do you handle that? Maybe that's more educational, saying when you have done this, this is what that response was. I know some people that love foam rolling. I know people that like hot tubs. I know people that like cold tubs. Like, I don't care what the modality is, but rest assured, every intervention does have some sort of effect. Some are small and need to be cumulative. Others can be more acute. And so whatever we need to do to kind of assess that and assign a value to it. And to your point, there's a lot of context that goes into it, making sure that that's clearly identified so that way it can be administered to get the results we want.
What would be?
Oh, sorry, I just keep jumping in with my thoughts. I think we need to sync our
Yeah,
Wi-Fi.
our brains, right?
Because like it comes down also to types of stress, right? Like Justin was saying, is like, what are you? Well, coming back to the cities example, like, what are you recovering from? How long do you have till? What comes up next? And all these variables. It's just, it's simple. It's not easy. It's like simplifying with the correct information so you can make the right choice. But yeah, I don't know, it just gets me thinking.
Yeah. Well, and that's the other thing too, right there. That's what conversation should do. I can't tell you the number of places where they're like, you would walk in and talk to your head coach. You would walk in and talk to your athletic trainer. And I was like, my athletic trainer and I, like, and this is both on lacrosse and football, I could walk down and talk to them. We'd go get beers, hang out. And so we worked together because very quickly we said, what are we doing? Like, we're trying to do what's best for the athletes. We're trying to do something that hasn't been done ever or in a very long time. And so that fostered these communication thing. And I tell you, when I left Yale, I mean, I was the dumbest one in the room. My assistants were incredible. They've gone on to do incredible things. You see what they've done, their success where they've gone in multiple sectors. I was lucky enough to learn from them every day, and not having to have all the answers was great. And the results speak for themselves across all the teams, 32 teams at Yale. I think 15 or 16 of them were in the top 25, all Americans in places they've never had. And it's a testament to getting great people around each other and then letting them just step back, let them do their thing. And that was really, really cool to be a part of and to actually witness, the top 1% of the field day in and day out grinding together. That was pretty incredible to see those results. And it all starts with fostering that communication. You might come up with 3 things, 2 of them aren't any good, but you find that one nugget, that one thing that connects with the right player that they love and it makes a difference. I, as a leader, need to facilitate those communications. And when we walk out of the room, though, let's be in lockstep. We're not going to do this all right before the playoffs. We're not going to do this, we're not going to go into the coach's office and freak them out the day before a game. But let's figure out a way to integrate it. But yeah, those staff meetings, those quarterly reviews, those in-services, super important because that's where the magic comes out.
Would you go back?
To Yale or to college strength and conditioning?
Either one, because you, like you said, you spoke really highly of it, right? And, yeah, either one.
Yeah. So anything, and just again, just through stuff that I've gone through in life, both professionally and personally, um, everything's a snapshot in time. So what you witnessed at Yale was an incredible snapshot. The trophy that we had wasn't the national title. It wasn't the multiple Ivies. They built us a building. The Psi Performance Building is one of the best buildings in college, strength and conditioning, and alumni that really care. And that thing's going to stand the test of time. And Coach TJ, who was one of my first interns, if not the first, being the director, makes me so excited. And watching him take that program to another level, super cool. On the college side, again, everything's about timing. Everything's about the staff that you have. The staff that I have here at Hawkins, pretty incredible. Being able to work with a team to win a championship in the conference or within a sport, super exciting. Also pretty cool that I can speak to someone in Portugal tomorrow and then work with somebody down in Argentina, help someone get recruited in California, help somebody train in Florida, come back from an ACL. And so I love kind of where I'm at now, and specifically the power to be able to create a product that I had, some of the new reports we have coming out. I have an idea of what that's going to do, but to watch it go out and then evolve from the customers using it, that's super neat. And again, if anybody knows me from the innovation side, there's a reason why I co-taught, the engineering stuff at Yale, and we made the squat box. I don't know if you guys have seen that, if you guys are familiar. So I hated arguing with the linemen whether they got deep enough. So I said to the engineers, could you build me a way to tell if they got deep enough? So they made me this little box that has a sensor, and you say squat body weight, set their bottom, click it in, and then it beeps. Well, now when they go to max out, I can slide the box underneath them. It sends an ultrasonic signal and it beeps every time they hit bottom. So no more arguing. So being able to innovate is something that's super important to me, because I think that's one of the ways that I can really help the field, is kind of bring in new concepts and then facilitate conversations around new technologies to kind of help us grow. Because don't forget, strength and conditioning, our founders are still alive. Like the original surgeon is long gone in medical, but in strength and conditioning, we still have, the very, very beginnings of our infancy underway. And we've seen it now with the financial markets, with, how much people get paid and what they're worth. And so now, will college athletics have that financial backbone to handle it, especially with the NIL and all these different deals that are going around? It's certainly interesting. So for me, whatever snapshot of time I'm in, I try to enjoy that and try to kind of do it at a level that we haven't done before. And that's certainly what we're doing now with Hawkins. So I'm very excited of that.
As you are working with those people, if anybody jumps on the team, and they get this software with you guys, what are some of you're like, hey, all right, you're just starting off. These are the most important metrics that we want you to look at, that we found. I know it's not going to be a cookie cutter approach, but, we found these to be really important. And then, in the process of figuring it out, what would be some of the, those key metrics, and then, the different types of jumps or things that you would have people recommend to do?
Well, for starters, I would never go in and telling anybody metrics. My first question to every client is, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to do injury prevention? Let's have a conversation. Are you rehabbing? What is your goal? And then the other question I ask someone is saying, what is your biggest pain point? So if it's like time, like it takes too long to test, that's good to know. If it's, we have as much time to test and I want to do a deep dive on every individual, so I really, again, need to know the context of what the customer is doing. From there, I'll work back into a solution. And I think that goes across any of the Hawkins staff, is the goal isn't to be like, do these metrics, you're going to win, blah, blah, blah. No, like pause. Because don't forget, we have law enforcement, we have military, we have researchers, we have middle schools, we have high schools, we have club teams. So that fundamental question is, what do you need help with? What are you hoping to do? If you tell me that you need everybody to grow 6 inches, once they get admitted into college, I'll be like, well, the force plate can't do that. If you're saying I want to improve linear speed, if you're saying I want to improve power, if you want to do better rehabs, if you're looking for monitoring, if you're doing exploration stuff, if you're doing program design, that's super critical. So that's kind of where we start with everybody, because typically our customers got to where they're at because they're good at their job. And our goal is to see what can we do to augment that. You know what I mean? What can we do to ease it? So is it, again, speed? Is it a deep dive? Is it a post-mortem analysis of a rehab? Like there's a lot of different ways we could approach it, but we have to ask that first.
Well, that's the correct answer, I suppose, right? Like, but it's not the one that anybody wants to hear. They want to hear like, oh, I need to be measuring X, Y, and Z, and that's what's gonna push the needle forward.
No, I mean, one thing is how often are you going to test?
Good.
You're going to test once a year? You're going to test once a month? We have some people that test pre and post practice. We have people that test pre and post practice and then also before every lift. There's all different applications. So what's your sampling frequency going to be like? You know, and then so you tested, do you have the authority to do the intervention? What's your relationship with your coach? What's he going to do when you come in and say these numbers aren't good? So let's have that conversation first. So, and I think as you kind of like smile when you said that, I think people appreciate that we're not trying to come in with this one stop. We've got all the answers in our black box. It's physics and biology. And there's people who spend a lot of time learning about physics and a lot of people that spend a lot of time studying biology. And wherever you are in your journey, let's try to marry that and make the solution a good fit. And what we do today isn't what we're going to do for 3 years. We're going to iterate and evolve as you become more comfortable, because nobody wants to use technology and feel dumb, you know? And you think about that as like when people say, what does the numbers mean? That's the worst thing we could ever hear. What do these numbers mean? That's the worst. You know, but if we got to that point, if we haven't, you know, talked about it and educated enough, then shame on us. But we're going to go do this testing. We're going to do an install. We're going to try to get 40 jumps done in, 8 minutes. Okay, let's roll. Let's get it done. How are we going to display it? And then get there. But I don't want to ever hear, what do these metrics mean? We miss the boat if that happens.
How long are people tied into working with you, so that way you have, a minimum amount of time to be working with them, to be helping guide them, so that way it's like, hey, give us X long to try to work together, so that way you can kind of prove your value.
So people typically buy our stuff, and it's pretty straightforward because you actually buy the hardware. There's no leasing, complicated, this, that, the other thing, and then it's an annual license. And if we do a good job, you're going to re-up. Virtually everybody re-ups. You mentioned TeamBuildr as well. Once you get used to it, you just kind of keep with it. And what I would say is that, again, progressive resistance training takes time, right? So the compound effect of really good strength and conditioning or sports performance, that paradigm takes time. But what's pretty neat is I can say, hey, let's go in and test everybody today. And what can we learn? And a lot of times coaches will say, this kid lands really heavy. Cool. And we'll show them what that metric is. Or we'll say, hey, when you saw this, what else did you see? And then start to kind of build from there. So there's that kind of, again, immediacy of here's a slice of time. Here's what by physics happened. What did you do for training? We had one customer. I said, I don't know what you're doing with your training, but in the last 2 weeks, something happened. And they're like, oh yeah, we actually added new stations. We did this, that. Cool. Well, a bunch of your strategy metrics that we talked about got much better. Let's stick with that. And so they now have their little packet that they've used where they had a lot less soft tissue. Guys were playing well. The coaches were happy, but we were able to take that nugget and then kind of build. And so learning and kind of the give back starts on the first jump. Even just learning the words, even learning some of the metrics. What do they mean? And then what do they mean within context of their development, if that makes sense?
What's something that you want people to be able to write on a post-it note, biggest thing, like biggest takeaway from this conversation with you, or what would be something that you want to, talk about right now that we hadn't, talked about or asked you?
I'm super excited to think about what is in store for the field, because I think there is going to be, this is a renaissance right now of where there's so much data, you can't ignore it. But if we, again, look at the financial markets, we look at cybersecurity of the early 90s and 2000s, there is an optimization that's going to happen. People will be good at handling it, and people will not. And hopefully what this can do is show value to us. Because I talk to a lot of coaches, and I'm sure you guys see this as well. It's super frustrating to have a master's and like be below the poverty line. Super frustrating.
Yes.
To do that. And so where there's value, there's usually financial reward. And so I think that's super exciting, and I'd love to see that get corrected, because what we're going to have happen is we're going to lose our talent to other fields. And we've seen that even just with the H2F program that started this year. I don't know how many hundreds of guys have left, mainstays in college athletics have left, because again, there's a quality of life. There's how much you get paid, but being able to go play with your dogs or pick up your kids, not working 70, 80 hours a week, and really having value in your craft, I think is super important. And strength and conditioning and performance 20 years ago didn't necessarily have wins and losses. Now we can definitively say, like, yeah, you hire this individual, the athletes tend to get better, similar to what you would say with a coach, right? If Nick Saban, if you got Nick Saban and you brought him to your school, one would hope that your program, through his expertise, through his recruiting, we would win, right? Like that's why head coaches tend to get paid more. There's this idea, I'm going to bring this coach to bring our program. I'd love to see strength and conditioning get to the point where they're like, yep, Duncan French went to the UFC and like they are better for it. So-and-so went to here, they are better for it. And then down the line, because it's super tough to watch young kids with talent go like, I can't eat. Like I can't pay my bills. Like that stinks. I want to see this field continue to grow because we have an ability to impact athletes for their entire lives. Yes, we're working with them for a small window, but at a window that can really be transformative, both from a confidence standpoint, from a physical standpoint. And if you're dealing with a population that can go pro, that's cool. So that's what I think I get most excited about kind of going forward, because there's so much potential, but right now it's kind of a tough time for everybody. And so hopefully we can find a way to integrate our research, our practicality, the practical application, but really drive value to the individuals that want to make this a career. You know what I mean?
What do you think can be the stimulus or the driving force behind, actually getting that to occur?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's a great question. I know you, again, I'll go back to who introduced us at the first place was Coach Staub, Joe Staub, talking about, maybe there's a way, whether it's, medical costs or whether it's championships or percentage, coaches have performance clause. So I don't know if it's possible, because it's tough, right? Because we might do something physiologically that doesn't necessarily show up in wins and losses, but at the same time, like during my time at Yale, we won more, right? And so how do we find a way to do that? And I don't have a correct answer, but what I will say is there is definitely an answer out there. And I don't know, somebody a lot smarter than me needs to go out there and try to think about it. But it should be that there's a positive trend towards, financial compensation. And I think you've mentioned the 3 Ps. There should be some positive connection to really being committed to your craft, but then also being able to execute on it. We've seen certifications that I've seen people with a whole laundry list of letters, but then you ask them to go run the floor and they can't, like in the simplest form. Or maybe they're just not nice, because don't forget, at the end of the day, like you're just kind of a jerk. Like you're just yelling at people, right? You know what I mean? So,
Well,
yeah.
It's like you said before, like we have to consider still the early days of the profession, and still there are a lot of gray areas being defined, because I mean,
especially with technology though.
Yeah,
right?
at some point the data, if you can tell, was, S&C coaches or performance directors or whatever were trying to keep their jobs, and they were being judged by people that had no idea what the roles, intended or how gravitational they were. So what you're doing is you're getting all these players and all these athletes get ready to perform well in tests, and you don't really care if they translate or not, because you're just trying to save your own butt. So, I mean, of course, they're not, in an ideal world, not completely unlinked, but, what are you going to be judged on? What's going to keep you your job? Is it something like tangible? Is it anecdotal? Is it a feel? Is it, we like how this guy runs the floor, and, we always get soft tissue injuries, so it doesn't matter who comes or who doesn't. Like, what's your hiring or your firing point? Is it?
Yeah. I mean, I think if anybody wants to like really dig deep into this, go back to the Rottenberg sports economics paper that was written, I think in 54 or 64, where
hold on, I have to pause. A guy who says people much smarter than me, and then he pulls that thing out, like, oh, hold on, what? How did you know that? That's impressive.
I don't know. Again, I like to be a historian, and the other thing is history repeats itself. So I spend a lot of time kind of looking backwards to look forwards. And so in Rottenberg's paper, he talked about, it was looking at, I believe it was Major League Baseball. And so there was some fundamental truths. And so the idea was that in baseball that all owners were going to try to win. In amateur athletics, as we come out of World War II and kind of that post-industrial time, kids didn't have to work in the factories or farms. We now have this ability to kind of play sports, and sports was really great for Americana. It was also good for development of society and culture. It's really good for countries to have things to celebrate in the form of that competition and rivalry. But what we didn't reckon was that in amateur athletics, there was going to be billions of dollars. I can also tell you right now, when you have a school that has endowments in the billions, maybe it's not about just winning and losing. So there might be other goals or initiatives. And so from essentially professional sports to Power Five SEC football, professional sport, there's a range all the way down to Division III, where you're going to have these competing values. And I just don't know where that financial marker goes, because like you said, at Division III, all I would care about if I'm an AD are kids coming in. It's voluntary. Is the utilization up? That is first number one, because if they don't go in, we can't administer it. So that's that. On Division I, yeah. And again, what level, what strata are you in? And because in that paper, if there's not capital gain, then the GM would get fired, the players would get traded, right? So it was a productivity based kind of approach. I think right now in athletics, yeah, we do have to figure out what is important to us, but more importantly, what are we willing to pay? And what I love is seeing some of the young talent demand more. Oh, you don't want to pay me? I'll go work private sector. I'll go work, for a company that, I can train people around the world, or I'll go Power Five, or I'll go move here. So it's interesting, but I do hope that at the end of the day, as we go forward into this, there is kind of a little bit of clarity, but it's growing pains. Like people would say all the time, I'd say this on training, but I say it for our industry too. It's growing pains, not growing funds, right? If we want to be able to learn about this, it's going to suck a little bit. It sucks to have a master's and not know if you can pay your rent when you've got 3 roommates and you're 28. It stinks that a new coach can come in, you've done your job for 4 or 5 years, but they're going to bring in their buddy and you're just gone. Like that just doesn't happen in a lot of other economic environments. So I hope that there becomes a little bit more clarity and stability if we're going to try to attract new talent.
Yeah, I love it how we've gone to the philosophical thinking side of things. And I was talking to some former athletes today, and the relationship with the team and the decision making. And we were talking about how, depending, like you said, on the sphere of the sport you're working, especially if it's pro, it's sort of like a transactional environment in which the right decision is, hey, I might tell the truth or be nice to someone, but it's because I want something else, not for the sake of having the values or doing the right thing. So, I mean, can you blame the player or do you blame the game? It's just understanding the rules and the needs. But yeah, I love it how we're tying it down to this as well.
Yeah, and at the pro level, though, again, you have the individual actor. So you have, the athlete who can choose to do it or not. Most of the collective bargaining agreements have done a good job of giving autonomy, for better or worse, because we saw what happened when they eliminated the OTAs and the NFL, and when people didn't show up, they weren't prepared. So that's not good. But at the same time, if you're squared away and you have a good team and you know your body, it's nice that you can select that staff to be around you. But what's tough is if you're that Division I kid or the high school kid who maybe has limited resources and you have those competing things. I can't tell you the number of times I talked to high school. I'm going to go to the league. Whoever is telling you that, like whether it's in basketball, football, whatever it is, like, do you realize not only the gift genetically you have to have, how hard you have to work, but there's also an element of luck, right? You got to rush for several thousand yards in a game. But every time you're out there rushing, yes, positive gain in yardage, but it takes one hit to get hit in the knee, right? And so again, there is an element of probability and luck. And you guys, I know, we talk about numbers and metrics. A lot of times in sport, it's not an absolute. It's a probability distribution. And so there's never going to be 100% clarity. The MIT card counting team didn't win every hand, but they were better than the other strategies, and so they were banned. When we talk about data within context, again, always facing forward, being exploratory, open to new ideas, right? But then also having our action items where we know to be mostly true or more likely than not, and then acting, accordingly.
Yeah, at the beginning of the podcast, when you're talking about how lucky you were, I just had this phrase in my mind when I said, I believe in luck. I also believe the better I work, the luckier I seem to get. So it is, right? We just can't really say, hey, there is no luck involved. It's just the numbers.
Yeah, and again, it's just the people I had around me. Like I cannot tell you how gifted some of the students, some of the staff, some of the athletes. Like, we had, it's funny, I'll tell you this story. We had an athlete, we were, the argument about Olympic lifting, like should everybody be able to catch? Well, he goes, well, it's a Pythagorean theorem, and I could make a calculator. If we measure the upper arm and the forearm, we should be able to calculate whether they can do it or not. And I was like, you're ridiculous. But you're a theoretical, whatever, math major at Yale. Sure enough, the kid went and made a formula. He said, coach, go measure from here to here. And I'm going to guess whether or not they can do it. And some of the guys have small forearms and they can't physically get to the catch. It's pretty funny. And so like being around super smart people is really exciting. I think that's, what I miss a lot is seeing that kind of youth and that energy. And again, I still stay in touch with those guys and some of the staffs, but when you're around really good people, you kind of should just take a minute to reflect. Cause again, it's a snapshot in time. 2016 isn't going to come back tomorrow, nor should it. Right. So I think especially being grateful for where you're at, even if it's kind of crappy, be grateful for where you're at because you don't know what tomorrow is going to be and try to make the best of it. Anybody that's been around me, I don't tolerate the glass half empty. I don't tolerate negativity. Your worst day is still, a good day. It just could be better. Right. And so just trying to keep that mindset and let things kind of happen is what you got to do.
Amen. I've learned a ton during this conversation. Like you said, Fernando, like you said, like, it made me think like this whole thing has made me kind of going back to, again, the beginning of the podcast where it's like, oh, had some new information. Now I'm going to question everything I've ever done. And like, do I even know what I'm doing? So I want to thank you for that.
Well, you guys have got me thinking too. And again, it's nice to be able to, for everything that we've been through, just to be able to come back and have these moments of time to reflect and get back into the field that we love.
Yeah, I appreciate your time, Thomas. It was definitely I'm gonna leave with more questions than I answered, but appreciate for that.
Yeah, I was looking for like a little bit of like, okay, this is what we did. It was really, really hard and difficult, but like here's the short version of it. So yeah, I'm gonna have a ton more questions, and as I'm drive later on to go home, I'll be continuing to ponder them. So expect some text messages.
Yeah, anytime. I love it. And thank you guys so much for having me, be able to come on and tell that story because I was so fortunate to live it. It's nice to be able to tell people about it. But, if one thing from today's conversation can spark or motivate somebody to push a little harder, put together a team, these little pockets of magic kind of happen everywhere. And it takes sometimes just even one thought nugget to really kind of set you off. One degree, throughout space, you can end up in a different galaxy. And so that's what we got to motivate people. And these conversations are how that happen.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Stay in touch.
To the end of the video. Why don't you celebrate by watching more videos just like it? You can also help us on our quest to placate the algorithm gods by liking, sharing, subscribing, and commenting. Thank you.